1994 presented the biggest struggle for us in this series so far. Not because the wrestling was particularly awful, but because WWE only put on 5 pay-per-views across the entire year: the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, King of the Ring, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. Don't you worry though, because there was still more than enough cack to fill a list. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 worst WWE matches of 1994. Join us! Number 10, ALUNDRA BLAYZE vs LEILANI Kai at WrestleMania 10. On one hand, this match for the Women's Championship was the first time the belt had been defended at the Showcase of the Immortals in 8 years. On the other hand, it was a bit crap. ALUNDRA BLAYZE was the biggest female star the company had had in a while, combining her natural athleticism with techniques learned in Japan to create a style unique to America at the time. As for LEILANI Kai, well, she hadn't been at WrestleMania since the very first event back in 1985 and represented a style of women's wrestling that could be best described as They weren't given much time either, which certainly didn't help. After about 3.5 minutes of basic back and forth, BLAYZE hit the bridging German suplex to pin and retain the gold. It feels a bit wrong to dump on 2 legends of the women's game, but honestly the circumstances were not in their favour to have a decent match on this night. Don't feel too bad for BLAYZE though, she would have a much better showing against Bull Nakano at SummerSlam later that year. Number 9, Earthquake vs Adam Bomb at WrestleMania 10. Whilst BLAYZE and Kai only got about 3 minutes for their Mania match, that is still almost 6 times as long as it took Earthquake to utterly obliterate Adam Bomb. The nuclear-powered man was a late substitute for Ludwig Borger, who had been taken out of the show with an injury. And what was his reward for stepping in and saving the show? Being sat on by a giant hairy man. Lucky boy. Adam's manager Harvey Whippleman got all up in Howard Finkel's face, which resulted in the Fink giving him a shove. Out came Bomb to beat up the beloved announcer, only for Earthquake to run in and save the day. 35 seconds later, and after only about 3 moves were hit, Quake picked up the win in one of the shortest WrestleMania matches of all time. And hey, we're not saying that quick matches are inherently bad. Ultimate Warrior sprinting out to dethrone Honky Tonk Man was an electrifying moment. The crowd loved it when Rey Mysterio beat JBL in seconds, but this one felt a bit out of place. There was certainly a reaction when Tenta pinned Adam Bomb, but it's perhaps best described as a polite hooray. Number 8, the HEADSHRINKERS vs Crush and Yokozuna at King of the Ring. A match featuring Yokozuna and the future Rikishi with Art Donovan on commentary. You better believe he was asking how much everybody weighed. The 1994 King of the Ring pay-per-view featured 3 matches that had nothing to do with the actual tournament. One was Bret Hart vs Diesel, which was pretty damn good. The other 2, well, just sit tight. Fatu and Samu were defending their tag team titles against the heel duo of Crush and Yokozuna, Fatu's real-life cousin. Unfortunately, the pair being related did very little to add to the overall quality of this match. This bout was bogged down by its offense, which was mostly the 2 baddies trying to hit Samu and Fatu on the head to no effect. You know, because they're Samoans. It's a questionable wrestling joke as old as time. They also seemingly botched the finish when Crush kicked out of a roll-up that looked like it was supposed to signal the end. This led to Fatu entering the ring illegally and scoring the pin instead. Not a great match then, but hey, at least Donovan had fun. Number 7, Yokozuna vs The Undertaker at Royal Rumble. Yokozuna would begin the year as world champion and have his first major title defense at the 1994 Royal Rumble. His opponent, The Undertaker. To make things even more interesting, this title bout was also a casket match. But wait, Yokozuna is deathly afraid of caskets. How convenient. The bout just wasn't that exciting, as both big boys stomped around the ring without much semblance of a story playing out. That's possibly because they were stalling, because suddenly every wrestler who ever lived got involved in the match. Yoko and his army of heels dumped the Phenom in the casket to bring this dull affair to an end. Then, to cap it all off, WWE's production team worked hard to imply that Taker had died and his soul had ascended to heaven. Oh, and apparently that was Marty Jannetty playing Taker's soul rising out of the arena. Beat that, HBK. Number 6, Erwin R. Shyster vs Mabel at King of the Ring. Back to King of the Ring we go, and easily the worst match in the entire tournament bracket. Although he would famously have an even worse time at the following year's event, Mabel still managed to stink up one match at the 94 edition. His unfortunate unfortunate dance partner was Erwin R. Shyster, the best wrestling tax collector since, well, he's probably the only one, isn't he? There was little IRS could do with a man of Mabel's size, and the big lad wasn't able to hit any offense that looked even remotely intimidating. The taxman scored the win after his opponent foolishly went up to the second rope. IRS knocked him off and then pinned him whilst holding the ropes, an underwhelming finish to a pretty unlikable match. On the plus side, this was the match where Art Donovan first asked how much somebody weighed, and history was written right before our very eyes. Number 5, the $1 Million Team versus Guts and Glory at Survivor Series. Sadly, Guts and Glory was not a repackaged version of the Team Power and Glory with Bastion Booger replacing Paul Roma. Instead, it was a good guy group led by Lex Luger to take on the evil Ted DiBiase and his $1 Million Team. There were plenty of skilled wrestlers in this 5-on-5 encounter, Bam Bam Bigelow and Tom Pritchard, for example, as well as the star power of Luger, the hulking physical presence of men like Mabel and King Kong Bundy, and so on. What I'm saying is, this should have been better than it was. In fact, the match might have been better had it not been given a preposterous 23 minutes to fill. There simply wasn't enough entertainment to take up all that time, and as a result, this long encounter felt saggy and underdeveloped. At least Bam Bam looked pretty strong, and he got to be one of the survivors. And with that momentum, he would lose to a non-wrestler at the next year's WrestleMania. Number 4, Roddy Piper versus Jerry Lawler at King of the Ring. In the main event of 1994's King of the Ring, Owen Hart defeated Razor Ramon to win the crown and establish himself as his brother Bret's next major challenger. Hang on, there's still about half an hour of the show left. What could possibly be more important than this? Oh, 2 middle-aged men punching each other for half that time. Oh yeah. Yes, the real main event of this show was the semi-retired Roddy Piper taking on the semi-retired Jerry Lawler. Lawler had built the feud almost entirely on his own, as Piper wasn't around much on TV. This meant that the match had little to no heat to it, and the wrestlers involved did little to change this. There was a bit more of a storyline hastily jammed in on the night though. Roddy revealed that in his corner would be a young fan, previously humiliated by Lawler on one of his King's Court segments. Jerry's heelish ways would come back to haunt him as Piper's young fan stopped him from using his feet on the ropes during a pinfall attempt, and Roddy would get the win shortly after. If I've made that sound heartwarming and wonderful, I'm really sorry. It was actually quite underwhelming. Number 3, Lex Luger versus Yokozuna at WrestleMania 10. At Royal Rumble 1994, both Bret Hart and Lex Luger tumbled out of the ring at the same time to win the match together. This was done so the company could essentially have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to push Luger as the next Hulk Hogan, but Hart remained over with the fans as a talented workhorse. So why not have both of them challenge for the world title at WrestleMania? What could possibly go wrong? Bret's battle with Yokozuna isn't regarded as the best Mania closer ever or anything, but it's generally considered to be fine. The same could not be said for the night's first World Championship bout. Luger and Yoko spent 15 sluggish minutes bumping into one another before guest referee Mr. Perfect disqualified Luger for, brace yourselves, shoving him. Even more annoyingly, it was a totally pointless DQ, as it was supposed to lead to a Luger Perfect feud that never ended up happening. Number 2, the Royal Family versus Clowns Are Us at Survivor Series. Little people have long been part of wrestling's history. While some promotions have taken the demographic seriously, others have used them mainly as comedy fodder. Guess which one of those categories WWE comes under? One of the prime examples of this took place at the 1994 Survivor Series, where Jerry Lawler and Doink the Clown looked to blow off their feud. Doink had been accompanied by a sidekick named Dink for a while, which led to Lawler recruiting his own smaller wrestlers to form the Royal Family. Their names were Cheesy, Queasy, and Sleazy. Doink's crew, which consisted of Dink, Wink, and Pink, were named Clowns Are Us. Safe to say, this 4-on-4 match was the absolute pits. It was almost entirely tired jokes about the wrestler's short stature and cringe-inducing comedy spots until the Royal Family won with a clean sweep. Oh wait, we're not done, because now all the little people are ganging up on Jerry and Doink is hitting him with a pie. This is wrestling. Number 1, The Undertaker versus The Undertaker at SummerSlam. We mentioned in our last list that the main event of SummerSlam 1995 between Diesel and King Mabel was the worst closer in the show's history. Well, it turns out we might have called our shot too early, because this utterly abominable encounter from the year before might just take the cake. You might remember that The Undertaker was genuinely killed and ascended to heaven at the Royal Rumble. This led to the $1 Million Man introducing his own imposter version of the Phenom. This Undertaker, who we're just gonna call Underfaker, was actually Brian Lee, the future Chains. Paul Bearer announced that the real Taker was coming back at SummerSlam, and with that, the fight was on. Actually, no, it wasn't, because the two men had a surprisingly bland match given the unique circumstances of the feud. At least give us a doink mirror spot or something. Taker's style at the time wasn't as exciting as it would become, so having two people do it in the same match was a recipe for a total snooze fest. What's more, the bout before this happened to be the absolute classic steel cage match between Bret and Owen Hart. As if this one wasn't doomed enough already.